It's that time of day where we get to do another Doctor Who preview, but for this time it's gonna be for Oxygen, Doctor Who's next episode. But just before we start, I just really want to open up the window so badly, so let me just open it up right now, just get some air in right now, because I have read earlier that air is so healthy for you, and you should take more and more intakes of air every single day. It's so healthy for you. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoy my preview of Oxygen, and I will see you guys in the video. Hey guys, what's up? I'm back with another video, and in today's video we're going to be doing the preview for Doctor Who's next episode, Oxygen. Now, just before we start this preview, I just want to say that Doctor Who has had a brilliant start to Series 10 so far. The episodes that we've had have been absolutely amazing. The pilot, a great introduction to Bill. Then we had Smile, a brilliant futuristic episode, or should I say, a mixed opinions one. Many people thought it was a really good one, many people thought it was an okay one. I generally thought it was a really great episode. And then we had Thin Ice, a really brilliant episode in my opinion. And then we had Knock Knock, a controversial one. Many people didn't like it, but me, I obviously really enjoyed it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And let's just hope that Oxygen can provide us a really brilliant episode to Doctor Who, and maybe can we continue this absolutely brilliant streak of Doctor Who episodes, because we are on a roll here with Series 10. Series 10 has not even disappointed us yet, and let's just hope it doesn't happen, because I just hope that maybe the finale will bring a conclusion to this fantastic series. But I have to say that so far right now we've been given so many brilliant episodes so far, and I just have to say that if this streak can continue the way it is right now, if it could produce maybe some more brilliant episodes, we could be looking for a #1 series that you can pick that had the best start, the best middle, and the best ending to any series. It would have to be this series. I think Series 10, the production team, Capaldi, Permaki, and also Matt Lucas, I think they're putting all their efforts into this series to make this series the best series that is possibly done. So I'm just really hoping that maybe they can just continue this streak on producing brilliant episodes in Series 10. I just hope they just don't disappoint us yet, because I'm just really still psyched up on this episode, Oxygen. It feels like another futuristic episode, visiting to a space station, and this is Bill's first time in outer space, and I'm actually really intrigued to see her reactions to be actually in outer space, because she's experienced other planets and she's experienced stuff in the past, but she's never really experienced space before. But what makes this episode really special, it's like space zombies on a space station. And what I think about this episode when I think of the word Oxygen, which is the title of this episode, I think that this episode will have a resemblance that you only have a certain amount of oxygen and you don't really want to waste it, otherwise there could be a potential suffocating of loss of oxygen, and it could be a potential death in this episode. So maybe it could happen. But also we have space zombies in this episode as well, dead corpses, if you know what I mean. And I'm just really looking forward to this episode, because it feels like a real brilliant episode. And also this is the first episode that we actually get to see Nardole in another adventure, because this is actually Nardole's proper adventure. It's not like the pilot where he was just there just for, you know, the sake of it, for helping out the Doctor, and then they were introducing to Bill. I think this is Nardole's actual proper adventure in Doctor Who, although the Christmas special, if you could count like the spaceship and stuff like that, but I would actually count that this would be Nardole's first ever adventure in Doctor Who. And I think this one, as he said in a few questions that he answered, he said that spacesuits were very heavy, so Maybe did he get a bit jet lagged with this episode? I don't know. But I feel like that this episode will be a really great start to see what's Nardol's purpose in Doctor Who, because this is one thing that many people have been criticising over. Is Nardol worth it in Doctor Who? And now there were a few questions that I saw a video on, and it was on Crispy Pro, and he answered a few questions to Matt Lucas, and Matt Lucas kindly answered those kind of questions from Crispy Pro's viewings. And I'll put the link in the description down below so you can go and check it out. And I highly recommend you watch it, because from Matt Lucas's point of view, it's for him to experience Doctor Who, and he's like so agitated and so eccentric just to be on Doctor Who, and I kind of get that reaction when I want to be on Doctor Who. I think everybody would have that reaction as well, and I just really hope that maybe this episode, could we see Nardol's actual position, his actual purpose in Doctor Who, and maybe could we see why is Nardol in Doctor Who for real. And I'm just really excited just to see Nardol in a proper adventure for the first time, and just to see how well he does in this episode. So I'm just really looking forward to Oxygen. So without further ado, let's begin the preview with the synopsis. As we always go for, a little slip of paper. Always helps me out. Oxygen, written by Jamie Matheson. Now, Jamie Matheson is a brilliant writer, I have to say. He wrote Series 8's Mummy on the Orient Express and Flatline, two of the best episodes that I've seen in Series 8, and I think everybody would agree with me. I think Mummy on the Orient Express is still one of the best episodes so far, and then also he also did The Girl Who Died in Series 9, which was an okay episode. I think that was a very dodgy episode. It could have been better, a lot better. And also this episode is directed by Charles Palmer, which I'm not really too sure if he's directed a Doctor Who episode, but I may need to look him up a bit. And so here's the actual synopsis. The Doctor, Bill and Nardol answer a distress call in deep space and find themselves trapped on board Space Station Chazen Forge. All but 4 of the crew have been murdered, and the dead are still walking. In the future, where oxygen is sold by the breath and spacesuits are valued more highly than the occupants, the TARDIS crew battle for survival against the darkest evil of them all. A very interesting synopsis there. Really interesting. So there's actually a murder mystery in this episode. 4 of the crew members have been murdered, and their corpses are still walking around the space station looking for more lives to inflict more damage on and murder them as well. So it's actually space zombies murdering their own spacesuits, their own selves, and I actually really like that. I feel that that's very creepy. Also, the spacesuits, or actually the zombies with wearing the actual spacesuits, look really creepy in my opinion. I mean, just the zombies in their actual faces, they look so terrifying, like they've almost got a disease on them. And just the spacesuits in general, I actually quite like the spacesuits. It almost feels like a representation of like the Waters of Mars kind of spacesuits, when the Doctor wore that spacesuit. And I think the Doctor also wore it at the same time in Hyde as well. I think it was in one scene, I'm not really too sure, but I think it's a very different kind of style spacesuit. And from Matt Lucas's point of view, he says that the spacesuits were really heavy. So I was probably thinking that this episode could be a really brilliant episode, and just judging by the way that Peter Capaldi is really interested in this episode, I'm just hoping that maybe he does a fantastic performance. And also I'm looking forward to Bill as well, because Bill has never seen space before. Well, she has seen space in other movies and stuff, but she hasn't really experienced it properly, like going out into outer space for herself. This is going to be a new experience for her, and I feel like in this series she's experiencing so much in this series. She's not really been introduced to everything right from the start. She's been merely introduced step at a time in each episode. Like, she's been introduced to the past, the future, to space, and even to the Daleks in the pilots, which I didn't think that the Daleks needed to be included, but oh well, never mind. And I'm really looking forward to this episode, because it actually feels like there's only a certain amount of oxygen, and if you waste all of them, you could potentially suffocate. Now, I did see a few couple of clips from Doctor Who, the YouTube channel, and there was like a little clip of where the Doctor, Nardol and Bill, they were running around in a room, and then they were were and then the room was about to decontaminate itself, like to remove all of the air, and they were trying to hang on for, you know, for dear life. And that was just a little clip that I saw, and that really gives us an insight to what oxygen is really all about. But also, not only that, I really am intrigued with this synopsis, because the episode just feels so futuristic, and I just have a real good feeling that we're going to get a real brilliant episode. And also what I've got here with me as well on my phone, unfortunately I don't have the Doctor Who magazine. I think I need to get the other Doctor Who magazine for the next 2 episodes, which will be Extremist and the Pyramid at the End of the World. But I think for this episode, I've got actually some information on my phone which I'll read out to you guys now. And it's just a little bit more of how Jamie Matheson came up with the idea on the oxygen idea. So I might as well just read this article out to you guys, as I'm just going to read it out from my phone. I don't really have any pieces of paper, to be honest. So let's just go for it. Jamie Matheson about his forthcoming episode of Doctor Who Series 10 Oxygen, and the man behind 2014's Mummy on the Orient Express is out to scare us again. Matheson also wrote Flatline 2014 and The Girl Who Died 2015, chatted to Doctor Who magazine about showrunner Stephen Moffat's desire to refine space in and out space adventure, as he felt it had got too safe in Doctor Who, and Jamie said Stephen wanted to make space dangerous. If you haven't prepared properly, you will die out there. He wanted to strip back to basics, so that was the original brief. And the more we talked about it, the more we thought of space and as the monster, separate from the other monsters that we've had. So they're actually thinking that space could actually be the real threat, the actual real monster in this episode. And in I quote, Stephen wants to make space dangerous again. So he actually really wants to build some actual danger, some actual threat to space. And in this episode, this will really play with the oxygen. Now, if you've only got a certain amount of oxygen, you've got to use up those oxygen wisely. And if you don't use it wisely, then you're going to suffocate and die. And so he also added, you want a Doctor Who where people can say, this is going to scare my kids, but should I also allow them to see this? So it must be scary enough to scare the kids, but it must be not too scary. Is that, should I allow them to see this? So it's going to be a difficult matter to see whether they can put the level of scariness to a good standard so we can be scared about it, but not make it, you know, too scared. Otherwise, many parents will be probably saying like, oh, should I show this to my kids? If it's really too scary, then they'll probably turn off the TV and move on to another subject. So that's probably the reason of where they have to figure out the level of scariness in this episode. And then on the exact science of the episode, Matheson was also keen for a realistic depiction as opposed to a man-in-the-street version of space. Rather than going for space being cold, oxygen reflects the fact that pressure in a vacuum means that the boiling points of liquids go down. And the writer of Doctor Who magazine tells, so that you don't freeze, you boil, but you boil at less than 100 degrees, which it's a bit odd to get your head round. We spend a whole scene talking about what space is really like, and it's a good way to set up the peril and foreshadowing something that happens to Bill. And even in the Next Time trailer, there was a little scene where Bill actually gave out a little breath of air, and it almost felt that she was actually going to die. And so we could actually maybe get a proper explanation to see what space is really like, and it could bring up to a foreshadowing of what could happen to Bill in this episode. So that's actually building up much more of the suspense and tension, and we can really understand what's going to happen in this episode. And then there was a little bit more, which I'm going to read this a little bit left. There's more to Oxygen, which airs on the 13th of May 2017 around the world, than Science, Space and Boiling Points. Jamie also comments that there's a political capitalist side to the story, where the bottom line is that human life is not worth much. I'm glad it's in there. This episode managed to be a cerebral, a little political, but hopeful and awesome thrill ride. So that was just a little article that I just read from my phone, and just judging by it, it seems like a very interesting episode. If Stephen wants to make space dangerous and really scary, but they want to make it scary, so scary to scare the living heck out of the kids, but don't want to make it too scary, otherwise it may be a bit too scary and inappropriate for them to see. So they're trying to see whether they can match the level of scariness in this episode, but I really just hope that they can produce a scare in this episode, because I'm just really hoping that maybe these space zombies could actually pose as a real threat to the episode. But I also quite like the idea of how space is seen as the original threat in this episode, as the actual monster, because since there's just no air in space and it's an entire vacuum, I always see that as a very scary thing to have, because always in space I always try and think to myself, right, you're just in space, it's just a vacuum. But even from the vacuum, it still intimidates you a bit, because what happens if there was one tear in your spacesuit, you could potentially suffocate and you could absolutely die from a lack of oxygen. And I think in this episode, Bill, the Doctor and Nardo are trying to survive on the amount of oxygen that they have. It's okay for the Doctor because he's got 2 hearts, but with Nardo and Bill, how would they cope with the lack of oxygen? How would they use it up? They'll probably have no talking within it, but I'm just quite intrigued just to see what actually happens in this episode. There'll be certainly a lot of shocks, a lot of scares, and maybe a bit more of a political side of whether life is not worth much. And I think in that little sentence there where Jamie also commented that there's the political side to the episode, I actually felt that in many of the Doctor Who episodes, there've always been a side to where politics really come into play with Doctor Who, like in Thin Ice, like where the Doctor made that important speech about human life isn't measured by progress of industry, and I think that really connected to the side of politics in our society today. And I think this episode may have a similar side to politics, but I'm really interested to see the science behind it, because in the science sentence here, so you don't freeze but you boil, that seems quite weird and confusing, but you boil that at less than 100 degrees, so it's a bit odd to get your head round, but it does really build up to that suspense that it really brings a good way of setting up the peril and foreshadowing something that might happen to Bill in the episode. So that's actually really, really good, and I'm just really hoping for this exciting episode, because Jamie Matheson is an absolutely brilliant writer, as he also did Mummy on the Orient Express, which was a really brilliant episode, actually one of my favourites to be honest. And also Flatline, I really enjoyed Flatline as well from Series 8. And then The Girl Who Died was a bit of an okay, but I hope that maybe this episode could be his best episode so far. Maybe living up to the standards of the Mummy on the Orient Express kind of episode. Maybe it could build up to that kind of same rating. But I'm just really hoping for an outstanding performance from Bill Capaldi, but also from Nardo as well, because in the past we haven't really seen Nardo at his standard in Doctor Who. From the pilot, he was a bit irritating in episode 2. Actually, we didn't see him in episode 2. Well, actually we did at the beginning, unfortunately. Then we saw him at the 3rd episode, which I didn't mind him, and then in episode 4 of Knock Knock, I actually didn't mind him. I thought he was really, really fun. And then maybe in this episode, could we see him actually having a position in Doctor Who? What's his actual purpose? I mean, does he act as an assistant to the Doctor, and how will he help the Doctor in this episode? So I'm just really hoping for what Nardo brings in this episode, and I'm just really looking forward to this episode in general, really. I think this episode is one of those episodes which I wasn't really hyped for, because I didn't really feel like that this episode would be my sort of cup of tea. But when I had a look at the Next Time trailer, I sort of got some many vibes that this space station reminds me of an episode called The Wheel in Space in 1967, where the Doctor was invaded by Cybermen on the Wheel in Space, and that episode is really fantastic. And if you know Aaron on All Things Doctor Who, that's his favourite episode from that he really wants to see come back in, you know, the lost episodes. So that's one episode or one story that Aaron absolutely loves to bits. So it actually gives me the kind of sense that this episode could be like The Wheel in Space, where zombies can attack Bill, the Doctor and Nardo in this episode, but we're really not too sure. But I'm seeing that this episode could be a brilliant episode, and it's for Bill to really experience what a vacuum is really like, and living on a certain amount of oxygen is really, really difficult. And how does Bill cope with that? We're going to have to find out on Saturday. So I'm just overall really looking forward to this episode. I'm just really hoping that they can deliver a brilliant episode. So just from the synopsis, that the Doctor encounter a distress call in deep space and find themselves trapped on board a space station, which I know space station is quite a recurring theme in like classic Who, like the Ark in Space, Revenge of the Cybermen. I think most of the space stations that we've had in Doctor Who have been really realistic, but I think in this episode we could possibly get a realistic kind of space station. I'm just really hoping that the actual inside and also the outside just looks absolutely amazing. But just judging by the outside of the entire, space station from the front, from the outside, looks absolutely amazing. Just gives me some kind of vibes that this is like the Wheel in Space, but a bit more modernized, in my opinion. I'm just really looking forward to this episode. It feels like another murder mystery on our hands, that like the crew have been murdered, but their corpses are still walking around as dead zombies on the space station, and they're trying to find themselves and trying to kill each other. So basically you see like the zombies are trying to murder their own selves, and they're trying to feel like that. Well, that's a bit confusing actually. You've got dead corpses, but they've already been dead. But how did they even come up in the first place? So we'll probably get introduced to all of that in the episode, so we might as well see what could actually happen, or where did these actually space zombies come from. I mean, we'll probably get introduced to the episode and how they appear in the episode, and how the people who have been murdered, how they come back as zombies. And so this space station must have had about, I don't know, loads of people on it, a load of space staff members, and since all of them's been killed, maybe there could be like maybe about like 300 corpses on space station trying to lurk around and kill the Doctor, Bill and Nardole. So it's going to be really an intense episode, but I'm really looking forward to it. It definitely feels like this episode is going to be such a survival against the darkest evil of them all. So I'm very much excited to see what this darkest evil, kind of is, and what's the kind of mastermind behind this episode. Or it could be just space zombies in general, really. We're not too sure. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching for this preview on Oxygen. I hope you have enjoyed it. Make sure you leave a like on this video, but also comment down below on what your thoughts will be for Oxygen, and tell me what could happen in Oxygen, because I'm really just overly interested, just because this episode really feels like another episode that could be so successful. So I'm hoping for another brilliant episode for this, and make sure you do subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. So thank you guys for watching for this preview, and I'll see you guys next time for my review on Oxygen. See you guys then.